Hello and welcome. Well, this week I've been photographing badgers, not at the set, which is relatively straightforward, but in two different gardens. First one, a friend's garden, where I've been using a remote camera technique, so the camera's set up on a tripod and I've been, I think, 15-20 feet away controlling it with a remote control. And the second in my garden, where I've been using a very basic camera trap. This one's in my friend's garden with a very obviously urban or suburban setting, and this one is in my own garden, looking just a little bit more natural. Now these are pretty simple techniques. All the settings, by the way, all the technical details are on a free downloadable information sheet you can get on my website. So let's start with the most basic technique in my friend's garden. And the other great advantage of this technique is I actually get to see the badgers myself. Well, I've come to my friend's house, so they're unbelievably lucky, because just behind me here, literally within spitting distance of the house, is a badger set. I mean, how lucky is that? I remember actually years ago I did buy a house just because there was a badger set in the garden. It was a total disaster. The house was a wreck. I lost loads of money, but I did watch badgers every night. Anyway, they've got badgers just here, and they've been feeding them since they moved in, which was 13 years ago, and I gather the people who they bought the house from were feeding the badgers too, so they're totally used to people, used to coming up to the house. And they've been putting peanuts out on the steps that I'm sitting on, and they can watch them. Literally, the kitchen window, I'll show you in a moment, is literally 12 feet away, 10-12 feet away. It is a very urban environment. There's no way around it. You know, the badgers come to some steps that are obviously in a garden. I could, over weeks or months I suppose, train them to go somewhere else a bit more photogenic, but I've just given myself 2 nights to do this. So tonight I'll photograph them on the steps, no change as they are, badgers in an urban environment, and that's an interesting picture in itself. And then tomorrow night I'm going to try doing something a bit different and use a prop to try and make it look a little more natural. So here's the camera. I set it on the tripod at the bottom of the steps, slightly low down, so I'm looking up slightly at the badgers, which I think will make it a bit more interesting. You see there's a couple of gadgets on the top here. One is for the flash and the other one is the receiver for the remote control, and I've got the remote here. I'm going to be taking with me, and I'll be taking pictures, pressing this, and it'll automatically set the camera off. So in a moment, I can't do this with one hand, but I'm going to use my old sweatshirt here and wrap it around the camera, and that will help to dull the sound. In my experience, what spooks badgers is not so much the flash going off, surprisingly, but the sound of the camera shutter. So if I can dull it, that will help. Now the final part of the setup is 2 flash guns. Here's one here, and there's another one over here, just see there, and they're at an angle pointing down at where I hope the badgers are going to be. And as you'll see on the technical spreadsheet, the power's dialed right down. 2 flash guns essential, that's the minimum. I mean, I could have all sorts of different flash guns doing backlighting and that kind of thing. Never use one because you get awful shadows, but with 2, at least 2, then you can get rid of those shadows, and it lifts the lighting to a whole other level. So here's the setup: the kitchen sink, the camera, the first flash gun, the second flash gun, and finally the steps where the badgers are fed every night. Now the good news is that at the top of the steps there's actually a summer house, and this is going to be my hide for the evening. Well, I was very lucky and the badgers did come on cue. Here they are at the top of the steps. By the way, the red flashing lights you can just see there are the autofocus beams sent out by the flash guns. They don't bother the badgers and they don't show up in the final images. So here are some of the best pictures I got that first night. those pictures were intentionally suburban to show badgers in somebody's garden. But the second night I wanted to try something different. So what I did, I got a trough planter, I filled it with earth and long grass, and then basically plonked it on the top step and sprinkled a few peanuts amongst the grass. So it's the same badgers and the same location, but I did get a couple of shots that are just a little bit more natural. Okay, so that's the suburban badgers. Then I moved to my own garden. Now I know there's a set about 1/4 of a mile from me here. I've never fed them regularly, but I did start doing that about a week before I wanted to do the photography. Chose a spot. Now what I did was I picked a corner of the garden that's quite quiet, and I lugged this very heavy trunk. I'm not going to show you the film of that because it's not a pretty sight. It's heavier than it looks, and I've leant it up against another bigger tree trunk. Now for this kind of thing I use a trail cam. I've got a really old trail cam, but it works just fine. And I've attached it onto a small trunk that I've stuck into an old Christmas tree stand. The great thing about that is I can move it anywhere I like. So I knew the badgers were coming to this corner of the garden. I'd got the set ready. Now if I were to sit here, they wouldn't come. They're not used to me, not like my friend's place. So I need to use a different system, and I'm going to use a camera trap system for this. It's quite a simple setup. I put the camera on a tripod and in waterproof housing just in case it rains. Next I push a pole into the ground on which to place the sensor. Now the sensor points at my special tree trunk, but is itself of course out of shot. So when the badger breaks the sensor beam by walking up the tree trunk, it fires the camera. Then I place the 2 flash guns, just as I did in my friend's garden, on poles pointing towards the badgers, or at least where I hope the badgers are going to be. It's also a good idea, just in case it rains during the night, to protect your flash guns as well. So the sensor is completely waterproof, the camera's fine in the housing, and I just put a special cover over the flash guns, and if they get wet it doesn't matter. Now one of the reasons I've chosen this particular little bit of log to encourage the badgers, I think it'll look nice in the photographs, but it also limits where the badgers can go. So there's one line of travel, they can go up there or down. If I just was feeding them, trying to photograph them on the lawn or any open patch of ground, they could be anywhere and coming in any direction. So what I can do is I can set up the sensor so that it senses the badger when it's going up or down that log and takes the picture, and I can focus on the log and be pretty sure that if the badger breaks the beam I will get a shot. And the great thing is that I know from pictures taken by the trail cam that the badgers are indeed climbing up and down that special log. Now I always keep the trail cam running so I can see what's happening during each shoot, you know, what the badgers are doing, and therefore if it's not working exactly how I'd like it to, I can see what needs to be changed the following night. This is Harry, by the way, my special assistant. So in summary, here's the final setup. The log, the photographic set if you like, the 2 flash guns, the trail cam, the camera and the sensor. So how did it all work out? Well, let's end with a few pictures. First of all, a test shot just to get the lighting right, then a couple of unexpected visitors, and then finally the badgers. Hope you enjoy them. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you next time. Well, this was my favourite shot of a badger on the log in my original setup, and then I flipped everything around and photographed them in exactly the same way with the same kit on the main tree trunk that the log was resting against.